Unlike other videos, this one I'm going to start in the detection screen because I'm going to cover just a little bit of the visibility and granularity that we have within a Crowdstrike detection. So one important thing to note is that this entire video can be tuned out. You can just go on, skip to something else in our series covering Crowdstrike, but we do want to share this information so you can understand some of the work that MCNC is performing on your behalf. We still do give you full visibility into all of this information, and we're always welcome to, users who would want to come in here and learn a little bit more about the tool and perhaps be able to poke around themselves. If we look at just the overall screen, generally speaking, if you've not been in this environment before, you'll have no grouping turned on. A lot of times when you see MCNC show this out, we'll be grouped by host, because this helps us understand if a given device tends to have a little bit more issues than the other. Within here, though, we'll see that any detection will be ranked in a severity from informational, low, medium, high, critical. We'll be able to get a brief overview of what type of tactic it is, what the technique is. Again, a lot of this is going to map back to the MITRE framework. We can get some idea of what time it happened, what status it is, if anything's in progress in your environment, which actual file it was that caused the execution, and the agent that's working on it. For this, we'll jump into my Windows 10.2 machine here, which has 8 detections. Last online was 2 days ago, and we can see that we've got 1 high, 5 lows, 2 informationals. If we start off with this top one, noting that this is Windows, we'll begin to see that we have a full process tree of what led up to the actual detection. Here, 7zip.exe ran something that Crowdstrike didn't like, and we started seeing files quarantined, and we'll see that the severity was high. However, let's step back a little bit and understand that if we see something that's a false positive, MCNC may not contact you because it doesn't make sense to contact you and say, hey, nothing needs your attention, but something did occur. If you're curious about that, we can go over ways to have automated reporting. Either something like Monday 8 a.m. you can have a report from the previous week, or we can set up ways to give you alerts if you desire. However, starting at the beginning, we'll see that the Crowdstrike sensor is something that embeds itself in the kernel. What does that mean? That it's going to have pretty unparalleled visibility. Starting at the root of the Windows device coming up, we'll be able to see network operations, disk operations, DNS requests, registry operations, and any process operations the entire time down. Throughout every step of the way, we'll be able to see simple stuff such as, the host name, work group, here the username is the device itself as it's booting up. We'll be able to see when it was first seen and most recent behavior, as well as if it's something that's currently running. We may populate comments in here, or if you ever see anything from CrowdStrike's Falcon Overwatch team, which is included, we'll see it here. We then begin to start to see things like quarantined files, as well as having more access into user detail, host details, vulnerabilities on the host, network operations that were taken, such as the local IP, ports that were listened on, and remote connections, in both IPv4 and IPv6, and we get disk operations, so we can see every DLL that was loaded, any files that were wrote or read from disk or started being deleted. This will be present for every step along the way, so of course 337 disk operations en route, but then as we go down, MSI exec here is only going to have the 1 disk operation. Important to note here is that as we step through here, we can see username is still swalton10, Windows init, services, MSI exec, and right here is where we start to see our actual user logged in. In instances where, say, it's a MacBook and a user is logged in and then they jump into terminal and start running commands as root, we'll actually see a similar change where the username will change from that user's name to root. Another important thing to keep in mind is beyond having our network operations, disk operations, DNS requests, registry, and any process operations, we'll be able to get the full command line out of this every step of the way. This is useful if the attacker is trying to perhaps do a process injection and cause IIS to run PowerShell or command prompt and download a file. Sometimes if this is base 64, Crowdstrike will auto, decode that base 64 encryption. And while these aren't necessarily malicious files, it's important to note that we have access to hybrid analysis and VirusTotal, so we can easily pivot to those to get more understanding about a given file, even potentially explore sandboxes of those files. That's important to note because MCNC does try not to contact you for false positives, and that's a little bit of the information we can rely on to otherwise assume a little bit of understanding of a file and arrive at a conclusion, because we may not have seen every bit of software out there yet, but we are given the tools to understand what they are. Next we see Rundle 32's running, as well as its command line here. And then we have 7zip.exe actually being run, and what is it going to offend on? So here we're going to see that simply it trying to run and interact with this Metasploit here. It's going to start having files being quarantined, and every step along the way we'll have access to hybrid analysis and VirusTotal for every single one of these hashes. While Crowdstrike is a little bit more refined than basically checking hashes, you do have insight into this here. And you can see that every bit of files that we're trying to check out, we're actually going to be quarantined. Again, we can start seeing here where we start trying to run templates.net mem. We're able to start seeing what command lines were run. We'll be able to see triggering indicators and just a bunch of other information. Generally speaking, what MCNC will do with this information is type you up an email, and depending on the severity of it, we'll send it to either your distro or to maybe one of your escalated contacts if it's something like a critical that needs your attention now. And the email would be something like subject line, high detection on device S. Walton Windows 10 2. And then in the body of the email, you can expect to see something such as, on March 25th at, 1500 hours, user S. Walton attempted to perform the actions included here. Crowdstrike took the actions of quarantining these files and stopping it from running. So while you may not need to do much remediation and cleanup on the device, you may want to contact this user and ask them if this was expected behavior or if an exclusion needs to be put into place. If so, just let MCNC know and we can easily pivot to create an exclusion up here. And generally speaking, if this was a device that had a significant number of vulnerabilities on it, or we thought this might be something a little bit more concerning, we would always attach a vulnerability report with the recommended remediations. That way it can cut down on what all you need to do in order to help firm this device up, since you'll already be looking at it. So this was just one simple file. We can look at a couple more. We do have the ability to set custom intelligence. One of the benefits is that MCNC is managing this. We have ties to various Intel feeds and other information, and we will regularly put in custom IOCs into your environment in the event that we have global conflict or other known attacks of our sector in our state. We'll be able to utilize those IOCs to start to put in something like this, which is just a rather basic example. However, any time a device with this policy set tries to open up command.exe and run ping against DNS request google.com, we'll get an informational alert. This could be something rather basic like this, or it could be something a little bit more refined. We're also not limited to just a given IP. We can do the same thing with IPs here, as well as any given hash you would think of. Another detection we can look at here is just the basic choice.exe way to create a sample detection. This one's pretty easy to use on a Windows device. If you ever key this into command prompt, it'll generate one of these detections. We don't recommend doing this, in bulk, because it can pollute some of our feed, and we do look at this live. However, if you feel like wanting to run this, just send our SecOps team an email and say, hey, I'm going to be firing this off to test maybe some alerting or something like that. And if we look down here through the rest of these, we can see pretty simple, similar stuff. So again, running choice.exe on those to generate noise, as well as an instance here where we're able to see even if Chrome goes to what would otherwise be a malicious domain, so rotation.arealestatepr.com, and we can see that Chrome is actually what executed here. We can see the network operations associated with it. So obviously this is a site that's going to pivot and load a bunch of contacts to other things, as well as the DNS requests. So just going here, we start to see contacts to other given sites, as well as more testing of our custom IOCs to see, okay, we know manage BDE, we don't have BitLocker in an environment. Let's just set up an alert where manage BDE causes a detection, and these detections can go as far as to block that activity outright. One way that we've used this information as well is not just to simply say, hey, something happened, you may want to contact this user. We can also note trends across devices where we can say, okay, if we notice on these multiple times this same user was always performing the same action, we can go on ahead and summarize that. You do have some human intelligence here. An example would be an early client who had a malicious student who was going around to various devices, and he would log into them. They were lab devices with graphics cards in them, and after hours he would attempt to run a crypto miner on them. When he would actually do that, we would be getting a detection for it in a block. When the first one happened, we send a general ticket to the school saying, hey, this user's tried to install these crypto miners. It was blocked and quarantined. Just FYI, because that's a little bit more than a user who tries to install a basic adware pup or, something like Wave Browser. The user tried it a second time on a second night, and we updated the case again saying, hey, we've seen same activity happen a second time. And then it happened a third time on a third day, and at that point we decided to escalate and contact the school and provide them a very thorough write-up of every single thing that happened, on which time, on which computer host name, and we were even so granular that we could tell when he was loading it from within Explorer or when he was actually clicking into it from within the Chrome download box. With that information, having every step along tracking that he's logging in via domain, with hands-on keyboard interactive, we were able to provide them with his host name, and if we click here user details, just like we can see here, this was a network login, all of his were interactive. The only excuse the student could make to get out of that issue was, I gave somebody else my credentials. Other similar benefits of the Crowdstrike tool and the visibility we have here is that we're not like legacy AV vendors that are looking for hashes. We can actually start to catch some of the fileless malware that may exist out there. Again, an early client had a hash-based solution prior. Their SharePoint server they had been infected with a scheduled task that was doing process injection into SharePoint. During this time, it would actually load up a crypto miner. It was mining Monero. Throughout this process, we were able to pick out the actual domains that they were reaching out to, so the immediate response was to, apply some network blocks so that that miner couldn't reach out and, cut off the actual earnings that were being gained from there. That was pretty quick and, easy for them to implement, as well as they were able to use the visibility here to track down the exact scheduled task, which we provided them with and worked with them. We don't put our hands on keyboard necessarily, but we'll join you on a call and walk you every step of the way. You know your environment better than we do. And at that time, during a later in the day change window, they were able to remove that scheduled task, reboot the device, and when it was able to come up, we were able to see it's clean and clear. I will say that if you've watched the video on our Discover asset over here and you look at system resources, we were able to then go into that device and system resources and get a little bit of a utilization graph where the device went from pegged 100% CPU down to a little bit more reasonable 20-25%. So even little minor things like that, Crowdstrike will catch as it stands up in your environment, even if your existing solution has missed it. And every step of the way, MCNC will be here to help guide you through how to remediate that and fix the problems we find. Hope that was informational, and thank you and stay secure. If you enjoyed the video, please do make sure to share it out with folks in your cohort or anybody you think it could be useful to. We're all in this migration journey together. And always remember, if you have any questions, we're here to help, and you know how to get a hold of us.